Tammy, how come you got so involved and so passionate about West Papua?
Well, it's a long-term research interest of mine and something that I am involved with in an advocacy and activist kind of
But
dimension
personally,
as well. But yes, I do have very strong biographical links to West Papua. So I grew up in Papua New Guinea until I was about 8 years old. So Papua New Guinea is the eastern half of the island of New Guinea. West Papua is the western half. And both my father's parents and my mother's parents were missionaries in Papua New Guinea. My parents went back to work in the 80s, and that's how I ended up there. And so I developed at a very early age a love for Melanesia, Melanesian people and cultures and geography.
what do you love about it?
What do I love? One of the things I love is the way that you're always made to feel welcome, no matter who you are, and always included as part of a celebration, part of someone's family. I love Melanesian music and celebrations, feasts. I love the climate, tropical climate, the smells, the beautiful, lush landscapes.
So when did you first hear about troubles in West Papua?
So what happened, I think, was I was working in East Timor in my early 20s, right after East Timor became independent. And I was reading a lot about East Timorese history. And at the same time, I think my dad had been telling me, quite a similar political history has taken place in West Papua. Both of the territories were occupied by Indonesia. Yet I thought, why is East Timor independent and West Papua isn't? And when I came home from East Timor, I got in touch with a person by the name of Joe Collins, who runs the Australia-West Papua Association in Sydney. And Joe said, join my email list. And every day I would be sent news articles from West Papua or about West Papua.
But you know some of the leaders, don't you?
Well, then I attended a talk at Sydney Uni by two West Papuan leaders, and I made friends with one of them. Over time, as I decided to do a PhD on West Papua, this is what I mean about Melanesian welcome. Leaders were very willing to give me the time of day. The leaders of the West Papuan independence movement. I had very little experience, very little knowledge. All I wanted to do was learn more and tell people more. And they said to me, listen, we will talk to you and we'll tell you about what's happening, but make sure you don't use our stories for your own purposes and publish and forget about us. Make sure if we talk to you and we tell you what's happened to us, that you tell other people.
So what was the story? Like that West Papua was originally part of the Dutch, wasn't it? And then what happened?
So the Dutch administered the territory of West Papua as well as the Dutch East Indies. When Indonesia became independent, which the Dutch East Indies became independent, Indonesia decided that it wanted to take West Papua with it. West Papuans and the Dutch were quite surprised about this because to the Dutch, West Papua had essentially been seen as a colonial backwater and they couldn't really see why Indonesia would be interested in West Papua. However, it became known later on that West Papua is home to the largest gold mine and the third largest copper mine in the world. And Indonesia was somewhat aware of the ample resources in West Papua. They also had plans to continue to move migrants from overcrowded islands in Indonesia.
So they saw the space as well.
They saw the space in West Papua. They also had nationalist reasons. They thought, well, we want the Dutch completely out of this region.
And it was pretty violent, wasn't it?
It was very violent. So Indonesia started military incursions around 1962, 1963. They were determined to take West Papua with them. The Dutch were preparing West Papuans for political independence, to have their own nation state at that time. And so the Dutch and West Papuans said no, and Indonesia said, we're going to take you. And if you don't let us take West Papua, we're going to go to Russia, we're going to side with the communists, and we're going to use Russian weapons. And
so this was in the Cold War, so Americans just gave in.
Americans said, look, Dutch, back off. Australia, back off. Let Indonesia have West Papua. So the West Papuans had absolutely no say over their future.
So wasn't there a plebiscite or something?
There was. So what happened was there was what is known as a New York Agreement was signed early on 1963, I believe. And what was decided in that was that West Papua would be administered by Indonesia until 1969. In 69, there would be a vote, a referendum called the Act of Free Choice.
And what happened?
The UN came in to oversee this referendum, but they turned a blind eye to what actually took place. Indonesia said they handpicked less than 1% of the West Papuan indigenous population to vote, and they said, if you don't vote for continued annexation with Indonesia, we're going to cut your tongues out. And so, of course, you can understand why those people who are handpicked, who are selected to vote, voted for Indonesia. It was a travesty of international justice. The General Assembly at the UN took note of the vote that was in Indonesia's favour, and from then on it was considered under international law that West Papua was part of Indonesia.
But there's movements for independence all through West Papua, aren't there?
There are, and they're becoming increasingly active. People are taking to the streets on a daily basis now.
Really? We don't hear any of this.
No, I mean it's becoming it's being picked up in mainstream media more and more, but compared to other countries, what's going on in other countries, there's very little attention paid to what's happening in West Papua, which is extremely worrying considering it's our neighbour.
Have there been many assassinations and executions?
To be an independence leader in West Papua is very dangerous. Most independence leaders have ended up assassinated, have been killed. There's Arnold Up, who was a musician in '83, who was killed because he tried to collect West Papuan cultures, songs and dances, and that was seen as dangerous by the Indonesian occupation. They wanted to wipe out West Papuan culture. They didn't want it to thrive. Kelly Kwalik, an OPM, TPN guerrilla fighter, was also assassinated in 2009. Taze Elawai, who was a leader of the Papuan Presidium Council, basically a democratic structure set up by West Papuan leaders to have.
So are there many in prison?
And there are quite a few political prisoners. So the current Indonesian President Joko Widodo has several years ago said he would release all Papuan political prisoners, and there was a show of releasing some of them, but since that time Papuans are arrested on a very frequent basis on very little evidence, mainly for taking part in peaceful protests.
So where is independence centred now? Where in the world is West Papuan independence centred?
Oh, right. So there is an interim government which was established a couple of years ago. The interim president, I think it's president, is Benny Wenda, who is based in Oxford in the UK. He is a West Papuan refugee and very strong, charismatic leader. He doesn't necessarily have plans to be the president or prime minister into a future.
So he must have some people in a kind of a cabinet.
There are cabinets, there are ministers, but their names are kept on the down low at present because of.
And how are they appointed? Are they elected or?
So there are different processes, but through consensus amongst the different independents. So this interim government actually is called the United Liberation Movement for West Papua, and it's an amalgamation of the three leading independence movements or organisations up until this point. And so the leaders represent the West Papuan independence movement on a rolling basis.
And do they get together? They get together in England, do they?
England or different places around the world. At different times, yeah. But it's extremely difficult for them because it's really hard to get out of West Papua if you are a leader within West Papua.
So you must hear sad stories all the time.
All the time.
All the time.
Daily basis.
Like I said, there's always some bugger wanting to take away your freedom. Always. And we always have to be on guard against that because people, to my way of thinking, people have a divine right to live their own life in freedom.
They do. And West Papuans will never give up the fight, they have said. And so far that has been the case.
More strength to them.